Alessandro Romano was finished with engagement parties long before he arrived at the De Luca villa. His offer was simple: one night of order in a room already leaning toward ruin, one public disaster. One intervention, one debt kept from becoming a massacre. Arya De Luca had simpler rules: smile when spoken to, don't embarrass the family. Marry the man her father chose, and pray affection could be learned like a prayer repeated often enough. But before the champagne went warm, her sister would try to destroy her. Before the ring settled back against her skin, a mafia boss would close his hand around her wrist and decide she was no longer standing alone. And before the night was over, the engagement everyone came to celebrate would still exist in name only, because some men ruin lives with a signature, and some save them in a way that feels exactly like being claimed. The worst part: by morning, she would not be asking why he stopped the disaster. She would be asking why he kept looking at her like he'd already seen the ending, and why that frightened her less than it should have. I remembered the sound first, not Camilla's voice. Not the gasp that moved through the ballroom like a match catching silk. Not even the brittle little laugh I heard come out of my own mouth when my sister lifted her phone and turned the screen toward a room full of people who had dressed to celebrate me. I remembered the ice clink in champagne glasses, that soft, expensive sound, ridiculous considering what came after. "Tell them, Arya," Camilla said, swaying only slightly in a dress the color of spilled wine. "Tell them your perfect fiancé doesn't only kiss one sister." The photographs were clear enough from where I stood beside Marco, a terrace, his profile, her hand on his jaw. The angle intimate enough to ruin me before anyone even zoomed in. Someone near the string quartet inhaled sharply. Someone else pretended not to stare. My mother sat down without meaning to. My father went the color of old paper. Marco touched my elbow. That was almost the worst part, that he touched me as if we were still performing. "Arya," he said quietly, "she's drunk." Camilla laughed. "Drunk, yes. Wrong, no." The ballroom at Villa De Luca glittered with chandeliers and polished silver, and people who had spent their lives learning how to look away from blood until it got on their shoes. At the far end of the room, half in shadow, Alessandro Romano watched all of it without moving. I knew his name before that night. Everyone did. He wasn't family. He was worse. He was the reason men lowered their voices in restaurants. The reason my father suddenly answered calls in private. The reason a guest list for an engagement party somehow included 3 men who looked like they could kill without wrinkling a sleeve. Alessandro stood with one hand in his pocket. Dark suit. Dark tie, a stillness so complete it made every other man seem made of nerves. Camilla kept talking. "He told me he was only marrying her because it made business easier," she said, eyes bright with something too sharp to be just cruelty. "Should I read the messages too?" Marco's fingers tightened at my elbow. I looked at him then, really looked, and found not outrage, not shock, fear, not of losing me, of what was in the room. One of Alessandro's men shifted. One of Marco's hired guards did the same. It happened fast after that, the animal recognition of violence before violence fully arrives. Jackets parted, hands moved. Metal flashed once under chandelier light. My breath snagged. My father said, "No," but he said it like a man who had forgotten his own weight. Camilla took a step back. Marco let go of me. That was the moment something in me broke loose from the script I had been following my whole life. I didn't think. I moved. Straight toward my sister. Straight toward the line of sight where a gun had already come up. Someone grabbed my wrist hard enough to stop my whole body. Cold. That was the first thing I knew about Alessandro Romano up close. The shocking cold of his hand around me, like marble left in winter shade. He held me fast at his side, not roughly, but with complete authority over whether I could take another step. "Don't," he said. His voice was low, controlled, worse than shouting. Camilla stared at the gun leveled halfway between warning and decision, and for one terrible second, I saw what she had become and what she still was at once, my sister at 13. Sneaking into my room after nightmares. My sister now, dressed for war and calling it honesty. "Please," I said. I wasn't looking at Marco or my father or the room. I was looking at Alessandro. He turned his head just enough to look down at me. His eyes were almost black in that light. Not empty, that would have been easier. They were alive with the kind of calculation that made men disappear from conversations before he even spoke. "She came here to hurt you," he said. "Yes, and you're asking me not to answer that." I could still feel the gun in the room like a live wire, still feel his hand closed over my wrist, cold enough to brand. "Yes," I said again. Something unreadable moved across his face, then he looked past me. "Put it away." One sentence, that was all. The gun vanished, the room exhaled, quietly. Like no one wanted him to hear relief and mistake it for weakness. Alessandro released my wrist, though not immediately. One beat passed, then another. His fingers left my skin and the place they had touched felt exposed to air. Camilla swallowed. "I wasn't lying." "No," Alessandro said. "You were careless with the timing." He stepped forward then, and the whole room reorganized around him. He did not raise his voice. He did not speak quickly. "Miss DeLuca is leaving tonight," he said, meaning Camilla. "Alive because her sister asked for it. Mr. Ferretti is staying because I have questions." The engagement party continues for 10 minutes, so no one mistakes this family for weak. Then everyone goes home. He turned to me again. The first flicker of expression in his face was so small I almost imagined it. "Little flame," he said, gaze dropping briefly to my hand where it trembled against my skirt. "Next time you see a weapon, step back." I should have hated the name. It sounded like possession, like assessment. Instead, I hated that my pulse changed when he said it. Camilla left under escort, chin up, eyes wet. Marco smiled too much. My father would not look at me. The quartet, unbelievably, began to play again. I stood in the center of my engagement party and felt something permanent slide out of place. Across the room, Alessandro watched me with the same expression he had worn at the beginning. Still. Controlled, certain, as if what had just happened had not surprised him at all, as if I had. By morning, the photographs had done what explosions do best. They traveled faster than shame. My mother cried behind closed doors. My father took calls until his voice went hoarse. Marco sent flowers so large they looked like an apology purchased by a committee. The card said only, "We'll fix this." I left it face down on the entry table. At 11, Alessandro Romano walked into our house as if he had always possessed the right. No one stopped him. That, more than anything, should have told me how rearranged my life already was. I was in the breakfast room with untouched coffee and a headache pressing behind my left eye. He entered with Nico Belandi at his shoulder, broad, handsome in a crooked way, tie already loosened, carrying the expression of a man personally offended by mornings. "Miss DeLuca," Nico said. "You look better than I feel, and I resent that." Alessandro said nothing at first. He took in the room, the windows, the corridor beyond, then me. His attention moved like a blade, quiet, precise, impossible to ignore. I stood because sitting felt childish suddenly. "Why are you here?" "To prevent a second mistake," he said. I wasn't aware I'd made the first one. A tiny shift in Nico's mouth suggested amusement. Alessandro's face did not move. "Your sister is gone," he said. "Marco Ferretti is being watched." Until I know who last night was meant to embarrass and who it was meant to signal, you don't go anywhere alone. I stared. "That isn't your decision. It is now." There are sentences that sound dramatic in books and absurd in real life. That one should have. It didn't, not from him. From him, it sounded like weather. I folded my arms. "You don't own my schedule." "No," he said, "only the thread around it." I hated that the answer landed. Rosa came in then with a tray of pastries and saw Nico's face turn reverent like a pilgrim entering church. He looked from the tray to her and back again. "Rosa," he said softly, "if that is an apricot cornetto, I need you to know I've lived honorably and should be rewarded." Rosa, 60 if she was a day, hair pinned severely, gave him a flat look. "Doctor said no sugar." "My doctor is a coward." Your doctor went to medical school and still fears joy. She set the tray down beyond his reach with military precision. I almost laughed. The sound startled me when it escaped. Alessandro's eyes shifted to me at once, as if he had been waiting to see whether I still could. Nico pointed a wounded finger at Rosa. This is targeted persecution, Signorina. If I die thin, let it be known I did not consent. Die quietly, Rosa said and left. He sighed like a tragic poet abandoned at sea. We had something once. You never had anything, Alessandro said. I had hope. You had hypertension. That one nearly made me smile again. Nearly. Alessandro stepped closer to the table. Not close enough to crowd me. Close enough that I noticed the faint smell of cedar and cold air still clinging to him, as though part of him had not fully come indoors. Marco called, he asked. He sent flowers. Coward. The word came from me before I could soften it. His gaze settled on my face. Yes. I looked away first. That annoyed me. What exactly are you implying? I asked. That my sister woke up yesterday and spontaneously decided to destroy my engagement in front of half of Palermo. That she had help. That this is some kind of... Yes. He let the word rest between us. Heavy, unadorned. I was suddenly tired of being handled like a fragile object everyone wanted to move without asking. I am not one of your men, I said. You don't get to place guards around me and expect gratitude. No, he said quietly. I expect compliance. The room cooled. Nico, wisely, busied himself staring at the apricot cornetto like a man composing his final testament. I took a breath that didn't help. And if I refuse... Alessandro's expression did not change. Then I follow you myself. That should have been threatening. It was. It was also something worse because underneath the steel I heard truth. Not posturing, not strategy, fact. I didn't know what to do with a man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. Why do you care? For the first time, something almost like hesitation crossed his face. He looked at my wrist. The place he had gripped last night had faint marks on it, pale against my skin. His voice lowered. Because when everyone else moved back, you stepped toward the gun. The room went very still. Nico looked up then, quick and sharp, as if that answered something for him too. I was trying to protect my sister. I know. She humiliated me. I know. Then stop saying it like it means something. His eyes lifted to mine again. It does. My throat tightened for reasons I did not have language for. He turned slightly toward the door, already done speaking, which somehow felt more powerful than staying. Men like Marco lingered. Men like Alessandro decided. At 2, you'll come to Romano House, he said. Until this is finished, you stay where I can keep you alive. I never agreed to that. He glanced back once. Little Flame, he said, colder this time, the name almost a warning. Agreement is a luxury for people outside this. Then he walked out. Nico made a desperate, beautiful grab for the cornetto, before disappearing after him, with Rosa shouting from the hall. I stood alone in the breakfast room with my coffee gone cold, my life tilting harder by the minute, and the awful understanding that Alessandro had not asked anything of me at all. He had simply told me where the line was, and the worst part was that, by 2 o'clock, I went. Romano House did not feel like a home until you looked at the kitchen. Everything else felt built to remind visitors that power lived there. Black iron gates, silent men with sharper eyes than smiles, floors so polished they reflected light like water. Doors heavy enough to make you aware of your own hands every time you opened one. But the kitchen was alive. Copper pans hung above the central island. Fresh basil stood in glasses by the window. A bowl of lemons sat under the light, bright and almost indecently ordinary. It was the only room in the house that seemed to admit people had bodies, appetites, habits. That they might need warmth and not only protection. Rosa watched me take it in. You bake, she asked. I looked at her. How do you know that? She shrugged. Your eyes went soft. That evening, after 3 suffocating hours of phone calls from my mother, 1 brief visit from my father, and no visit at all from my fiancé, I found Marco's name exactly where I should not have. On Alessandro's study table lay a file half closed, one corner of a photograph exposed. Not a police photograph. Surveillance. Marco outside a harbor warehouse I had never seen, speaking to a man with Franco Esposito's profile. I did not mean to look further. I did. There are moments when the world does not break loudly. It just tilts 1 inch and leaves you to notice that nothing sits straight anymore. By midnight, I knew 3 things. Marco had known Camilla was coming to the party. Marco had deleted messages from me while preserving messages from her. And Marco was in contact with people no decent fiancé should have been in contact with if he wanted to keep pretending to be one. I did not cry. That frightened me more than tears would have. At 3 in the morning, I was in the kitchen making pate à choux with my hair twisted up badly and my heart behaving like a trapped bird inside my ribs. I always baked when I could not think cleanly. The body understood what the mind refused. Butter melted. Flour hit heat. Eggs went in one by one. The rhythm steadied me. I made shells first, then a bitter chocolate base, then orange cream whipped with just enough honey to soften the edge without erasing it. On top, I spun a sugar cage so delicate it would crack if touched by careless fingers. Rosa found me halfway through torching the sugar. She looked at the tray. "What is this one called?" I stared at the thin amber lattice cooling over the cream. "I don't know yet. That means you're lying to yourself. Probably." She nodded once, which in Rosa language meant affection. "Leave 2 for me." "Hide 1 from Nico. He'll find it anyway." "Yes," she said, "but I enjoy watching him fail first." When she left, I became aware of another presence in the doorway without hearing him arrive. Alessandro. He stood with sleeves rolled once, no jacket, dark shirt open at the throat. In a house full of expensive things, he was still the object the room arranged itself around. "You should sleep," I said, because it was easier than asking how long he had been watching. "So should you." I set down the torch. "And yet here we both are." His gaze moved over the pastries. Not indulgent, not dismissive, attentive. "What is it?" he asked. I almost said dessert. Instead, I heard myself answer honestly. "Bitter chocolate at the bottom, orange cream in the middle." "Burnt sugar on top." He waited. "Because," he said, "because some things look finished before you touch them," I said. "Then they shatter." I hated how revealing that sounded after it was too late to take back. He stepped closer to the island, not too close. Close enough that his hand came to rest on the stone near mine, those long fingers still, elegant, dangerous. I noticed his hands too often. I resented that. "Does it taste good?" he asked. I wasn't cooking for comfort. The corner of his mouth changed. Barely. It was the nearest thing to a smile I had seen on him. "Then I'm the right audience." I handed him one before I could reconsider it. He took it carefully, as if anything made by my hands required a different kind of respect than he usually offered the world. He bit through the sugar shell. The crack sounded sharp in the quiet kitchen. He closed his eyes for half a second. That half second did something to me I did not want to examine. "Well," I asked. "It tells the truth." I looked away first. Again, from somewhere down the corridor came Nico's voice, low and scandalized. "Rosa, if you've hidden pistachio cream from me, I want it noted this is psychological warfare." Rosa answered without raising hers. "Go to bed." "I can't sleep hungry." "You're not hungry." "You're theatrical." Alessandro glanced once toward the hall, then back at me. "I'm ending your engagement," he said, just like that. Not "we should discuss it," not "you deserve better," no cushioning. My pulse jumped. "You can't end something that belongs to me." His eyes held mine. "Does it?" The question hit where it hurt because I did not know anymore. Before I could answer, a phone vibrated on the counter near him. He looked down. Something in his expression went colder, tighter. "What is it?" I asked. He was already reaching for the phone. "Nothing you're involved in." I almost laughed. It came out thin. "That seems unlikely." His attention was elsewhere now, but not entirely. Never entirely. "Go upstairs, Arya." It was the first time he had used my name. It landed harder than the nickname. I should have obeyed immediately. Instead, I stayed long enough to hear one sentence when he answered the call. "Tell Tio to move the harbor schedule. If Franco is sniffing around the DeLucas, he's already closer than he should be." Harbor. Franco. My fiancé's name in a file, and now this. The kitchen smelled like burnt sugar and orange peel, and the beginning of something I did not yet know how to survive. When I finally went upstairs, the taste of fear in my mouth was not entirely fear. The house slept lightly. I learned that quickly at Romano House. No one really rested there. They only lowered their guard in shifts. The silence had layers, the distant click of a weapon being checked, footsteps soft on marble, the muted murmur of Italian behind closed doors when men believed the women of the house were dreaming. I wasn't dreaming. I was in the kitchen again because I had become pathetic enough to trust ovens more than sleep. This time I wasn't baking. I was standing barefoot on cold stone, drinking water, staring at the dark garden through the window when Alessandro entered behind me. I did not jump. I should have. "You're getting used to me," he said. "I'm getting used to not being alone." The truth hung there between us, more intimate than I meant it to be. He crossed to the coffee machine without asking if I wanted any and began making 2 cups. "That's presumptuous," I said softly. "You'll drink it. You sound certain." "I usually am." He handed me the cup, milk, very little sugar, exactly how I took it. I wrapped my fingers around the porcelain and looked at him over the rim. "How did you know?" "I pay attention." There was no flirtation in the line. That would have been easier. It was plain fact, which made it worse. He leaned one hip against the counter, close enough that I could see the pale scar cutting across his forearm where his sleeve had drawn back. Long. Old. Not accidental. I looked too long, he noticed. Of course he did. "Knife?" I asked before sense could stop me. His eyes dropped once to the scar. A door closed behind them so fast I nearly felt the draft. "No," I should have let it go. Instead I said, "My brother got a scar on his hand falling through greenhouse glass when we were children." Camilla fainted. He laughed until my mother cried harder than she did. There was no reason to say it. I think I was reaching for something human, something ordinary enough to pull him closer to the rest of us. Instead he went completely still, not angry, not distant, worse, a stillness with pain under it. I set down my cup. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For whatever name I nearly touched without knowing it." For the first time, Alessandro looked at me like I had reached into him and found something he kept armed. 1 second. 2, then he looked away. "My brother was 17, he said. "That's enough." He said no more. It was somehow more revealing than a speech ever could have been. I did not ask again. The coffee warmed my hands. The room held us in its quiet. His fingers rested on the counter near mine. Not touching, not far. The sort of distance that can become everything if one person is weak enough to close it. He moved first. Not toward me, away. A fraction, barely, but I saw it. He had almost reached. He had stopped himself. That did something dangerous to my breathing. Down the corridor, Nico stumbled into the kitchen with his hair untidy and a face full of outrage. He was carrying a small tin. "I need a witness," he announced. "Rosa has committed deception." Rosa appeared behind him as if conjured by his complaining. "If this is about the almond biscuits, go away." "They were good," Nico said. "That's the betrayal. You said they were sugar-free and joyless. They were delicious." I experienced hope. "You experienced cinnamon." He pressed a hand to his chest. "So it is possible to love me without shortening my life." Rosa sniffed. "Love is not the word I'd use." Nico looked at me with tragic solemnity. "You hear this, signorina? This is how she flirts, cruelly, like a woman from literature." To my horror, I laughed. A real one this time. Alessandro looked at me again, brief and intent, as if the sound mattered more than the conversation around it. Rosa took the tin from Nico and smacked his hand lightly when he tried to steal another biscuit. "You'll ruin breakfast. I thought we had breakfast so life wouldn't be ruin." "Out," Nico sighed toward the ceiling. "One day, Rosa." One day you will regret denying me pastry." She shoved him toward the door. He went willingly, still looking back at the biscuit tin like a man leaving his country. When they were gone, the kitchen felt smaller, or maybe I was more aware of Alessandro in it. "You should rest," he said. "I don't rest well here." "You're safe here," I swallowed. "That isn't the same thing." His gaze changed. Softer would be the wrong word. Softer suggested ease. This was not easy, it was simply less armored. "No," he said. "It is." I looked down at his hands then. Long-fingered, scarred lightly at the knuckles, composed even in stillness. "The first thing I noticed about you," I said before I could decide not to, "was how cold your hands were." His expression did not change, but I felt his attention sharpen. "At the party," I added. "When you grabbed my wrist. Would you rather I'd let you keep walking?" "No," he nodded once as if that settled something. "Then keep the memory," he said. "I should have gone upstairs." He should have left the room. Instead, we stood there in the blue-black hour before dawn, coffee cooling, silence tightening, both of us aware of the exact distance between his hand and mine. Almost. That was how it kept happening with him, not an event, a pressure, a line pulled tight enough to sing. When he finally turned away, he took the empty cups with him. I watched him leave and thought, absurdly, not about guns or Marco or my father's secrets, but about the coffee. He had made it perfectly without asking. And I could not stop thinking about what that meant. My father kept his worst papers in the room with the saint statues. That felt appropriate in a way I was too angry to appreciate. He had gone out to meet a lawyer. My mother was asleep after crying herself into one of her headaches. The house on Via Libertà had become a place I entered now like an intruder. I stood in my father's office with the desk drawers open and my pulse going loud in my ears. I wasn't looking for absolution, only proof. I found it in a folder marked with a shipping company I did not recognize and my own name written in the margin in my father's hand. There are discoveries that arrive in pieces. Mine did not. A debt owed by my father to Franco Esposito. An agreement delaying collection if Marco Ferretti married into the De Luca family. Property access. Political introductions. Social legitimacy. My engagement listed not as a blessing, but as leverage. For one moment, I simply sat in my father's chair and stared at the page until the words stopped behaving like language and became something uglier. Arrangement. Placement. Asset. I was not being married. I had been positioned. When my father came in and saw the papers in my hand, he did not ask where I got them. He only closed the door. "That tells me enough," I said. He sat slowly, like an old man, though he had not looked old until that month. "Arya, no," he flinched. That mattered less than it should have. "Did you know what Marco was?" I asked. "Before you asked me to say yes," his silence answered first. Then, very quietly, "I knew what refusing would cost." I laughed once, sharp and ugly. "Not you, apparently." His eyes filled. "Mine did not. You think I wanted this," he whispered. "I think you signed it." That landed. It should have. He looked suddenly small to me. Small and tired and unforgivable in a human way, which was almost worse than monstrousness. Monsters are simpler. Fathers who love badly are more difficult to survive. "I thought I could control it," he said. "That seems to be the family talent." I left before he could say my name again. I walked the whole way back to Romano House, because if I had gotten in a car with anyone, I might have screamed until the windows cracked. By the time I entered through the kitchen, Rosa took one look at my face and handed me water without asking a question. "Upstairs," she asked. I shook my head. Instead, I went to the terrace off the library and sat in a chair that overlooked the darkening city. Palermo below, sea beyond, the sky fading to the color of bruises. Alessandro found me there after sunset. He did not ask permission to sit. He did not ask what happened. He lowered himself into the chair beside mine and looked out over the city as if grief were easier to face when neither of us had to look directly at it. For several minutes we said nothing. Then I held out the papers. He took them, read, once, no surprise. "You knew," I said. "Yes." My laugh this time was thinner. Of course. I was waiting for the part that was yours to learn. That is the kind of sentence men like you say to make cruelty sound respectful. His head turned slightly. Do you want lies instead? No. Then don't punish me for choosing the cleaner cut. I looked away because he was right and I hated it. Below us, a car rolled through the front gates. Men moved in the courtyard. Somewhere in the house, Nico was arguing with someone about roasted peppers as if civilization depended on it. I was an entry in a ledger, I said at last. No, I turned back. His expression had changed in a way I did not yet know how to survive. It was not tenderness. Not exactly. It was anger, but not at me. And something beneath it that made the air feel altered. You were treated like one, he said. That is different. The distinction nearly undid me. He could have touched me then. I know that now. The world had narrowed enough to permit it. My hands were clenched together in my lap. His were still at his sides. He looked at my fingers once. Then he did nothing. That restraint shook me harder than hunger would have. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Because I needed certainty. You had it. I needed more. The answer was infuriating. It was also honest in the way only dangerous men can afford to be. A phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it once. Then again. The third time he took it out, glanced at the screen, and stood. Before he answered, voices carried up from below. Nico, if she loved me, she wouldn't steam the fish. Rosa, if I loved you, I'd season it better. Even through the wreckage of the day, the sound tugged something loose in me, half a laugh. Half a crack, Alessandro heard it. His eyes came back to me, stayed. I do not know what he almost said then. I only know he chose not to. He answered the phone instead, stepping away toward the far end of the terrace. I heard only one word before he lowered his voice. Marco. Later, when he came back, I was still sitting exactly where he had left me. Inside, he said. What happened? Not tonight. I'm tired of men deciding what I can know. A beat passed. Then he said, your fiancé just took a call from Franco Esposito. Not former fiancé. Not yet. The sky above Palermo had gone fully dark by then. The city lights below looked beautiful in the way dangerous things often do from a distance. I folded the papers once more and understood, finally, that my father had not merely failed me. He had handed me to the wolves and called it protection. The ambush began with bread. A waiter set down the basket, smiled too quickly, and reached inside his jacket instead of for the wine list. Afterward, I would remember Alessandro's hand, flattening against my ribs, before I understood why. The force of it drove me sideways out of the chair a split second before the first shot shattered glass where my head had been. The restaurant erupted. People screamed. Chairs overturned. Cutlery clattered bright and useless against tile. Alessandro was already standing, one arm shoving me behind the weight of his body, the other drawing a gun from nowhere I had seen. His face changed. Not wild, never wild. Clear, that was worse. He became clearer, stripped down to function so complete it made everything human in the room feel temporary. Nico, he barked. On your left. Gunfire cracked through the private dining room. Alessandro fired once, twice, moved before anyone else had finished deciding fear was appropriate. One man went down beside the shattered wine cabinet. Another hit the floor between tables. I crouched where he had pushed me, hands over my mouth, heart slamming so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. A third attacker came through the service door. I saw him too late. Alessandro did not. He turned toward the movement, took the shot, and the man folded, but not before a blade flashed in close quarters and dragged across Alessandro's side. I heard myself make a sound I had never made before. He did not. He grabbed my arm. Move! We were out through the kitchen in seconds, Nico behind us, two more men closing the corridor. The smell of garlic and hot oil and blood mixed into something I knew would live in me forever. Back at Romano House, the adrenaline left my body in pieces. I was in Alessandro's room because Rosa had pushed a first aid box into my hands and said, very calmly, if I do it, he'll tell me he's fine. If you do it, he might sit down. He was sitting now on the edge of a chair, shirt unbuttoned, skin marked with bruises, and the angry red slice along his side that was shallow enough not to kill and deep enough to enrage me on sight. "You need stitches," I said. "I need the bleeding stopped." "That is what stitches are for." His mouth shifted faintly. "Bandage first, doctor second." My hands shook once as I cleaned the wound. Then steadied. That was the thing about skill. It doesn't ask whether your heart is ready. It only asks whether your hands remember. He watched me in the mirror across the room while I worked. The silence felt closer than speech. "You're not afraid of blood," he said. "I'm afraid of many things, but not this." No, because the truth was stranger than that. I was not afraid of his blood. I was afraid of how badly seeing it had hurt. When I pressed gauze to the cut, he hissed through his teeth. "Sorry, don't be." I wrapped the bandage carefully. My fingers brushed his skin, warm now. Warmer than I expected. The cold I remembered from the party seemed gone, or maybe hidden deeper. When I finished, I stepped back. He caught my wrist. Not hard, just enough. The same place as the party, the same pulse jumping there, but his hand was different now, still cool at the edges, human in the center. "Arya!" My name in his voice was not safer than the nickname. It was worse. "I don't know what I'm doing here," I said. I was not talking about the bandage. His grip loosened but did not release. Neither of us moved. The room smelled like antiseptic, gunpowder clinging faintly to his discarded shirt, and the clean soap from my hands. Somewhere downstairs, doors opened and closed. Men spoke low. War rearranged itself around the house. But inside that room, everything had narrowed to his fingers around my wrist and my own disastrous inability to pull away. "I know," he said. That was all. He let go, and because the universe was cruel, the loss of contact landed like grief. He stood, slowly, deliberately. He was taller this close, broader, his restraint almost visible like another layer of clothing. For one suspended second, I thought he might kiss me. Instead, he stepped back. That was the moment I understood the depth of his control. Not that he wanted nothing, that he wanted and refused himself anyway. "Marco is done," he said. My throat tightened. "You don't get to decide that for me. He decided it when he sat at Franco Esposito's table." I stared. "You're certain?" "Yes." The room went still around the word. A flash of Alessandro's mind came to me later, though he never said it aloud. He would admit it to himself that night, standing alone at the window after I left. She stepped toward the gun. Not away from it. Every person in my world steps back from violence and calls it instinct. She walked forward to save the sister who had just broken her. That was the moment. That was when she got in. I did not hear those words then. What I heard was my own breath and his next sentence. "You are under my protection now." I should have fought that line. I knew I should have. Instead, I asked softly, "And what does that make me?" His eyes held mine. Dark, exhausted, absolute. "Alive," he said. When I reached the door, his voice stopped me one last time. "Little flame." It sounded different now, less like possession, more like warning issued to himself. I looked back. "Don't step toward bullets for anyone else." The answer rose from somewhere too honest. "What if it's you?" His composure cracked then, just a fraction. Enough that I saw what lived underneath it, and had to leave before it caught fire in me too. Downstairs, the house was braced for war. Upstairs, in a room that smelled like blood and antiseptic, and something neither of us was naming yet, my engagement ended without either of us touching the ring. War did not arrive with drums. It arrived with smaller cruelties. A car followed too closely. A florist shop on Romano property burned before dawn. 2 men caught whispering where they should not have been. Tio, who ran logistics, who always called me Signorina like it meant sunlight rather than rank, took a bullet in the shoulder meant for Nico and laughed through blood when they carried him in. "Rosa owes me soup," he said through clenched teeth. Nico looked at him and said, "If you die before confessing your taxes properly, I'll kill you." Even bleeding, Tio smiled. That was the kind of house this was, men built out of bad jokes and body armor. I sat with him in the infirmary while the doctor worked. He asked me for water. I handed it over. His hand shook only once. "I'm sorry," I said. "For what?" "For being near the reason." Tio winced as the doctor tightened a stitch. "Signorina, in this house there is always a reason." "Don't flatter yourself." I laughed despite myself. Then I nearly cried because I could. That afternoon, Alessandro left for a meeting with 2 captains and 8 shadows at his back. He paused at the door when he saw me standing in the hall. "Inside after sunset," he said. I folded my arms. "You say things as if walls obey you." "They do. That is not normal." "No," he said. "It is." He might have touched my face then. The air suggested it. His hand rose half an inch, stopped, lowered. Another almost. Another refusal. When he left, the house felt wrong, not unsafe. Wrong. By dusk, I understood why. 2 men grabbed me between the herb garden and the side entrance. Efficient. Gloved. One hand over my mouth, one arm around my waist, dragging me toward a black sedan idling beyond the hedge. I stomped, twisted, bit hard enough to taste blood through skin. One of them swore. The other hissed in my ear. "Message only." "Quiet." They shoved me against the back door of the car and slipped an envelope into my coat before releasing me all at once, disappearing as fast as they had come. By the time Alessandro's guards reached me, they were gone. Inside the envelope was a single photograph of me entering Romano House 3 days earlier. On the back, one sentence. "He cannot keep what he did not build." Franco, that night my father sent a car, not metaphorically, literally. Black sedan at the front entrance, driver waiting, my father's note folded on the seat. "Come home, we can still repair this. Please." I stood at the open car door with my bag in my hand. No one stopped me. That mattered. Nico was in the courtyard pretending not to watch, while Rosa trimmed dead leaves from the potted lemon trees. Tio slept inside with painkillers in his blood. Alessandro was not yet back. The exit was real. That was the cruelty of it. I could leave the armed halls, the locked gates, the cold-handed man who had become too central to my breathing. I could go back to a house where betrayal wore family faces and everything dangerous arrived in silk instead of gunmetal. The driver looked straight ahead. "Signorina," I looked down at the bag in my hand. Overnight things, passport, the ring I had finally taken off wrapped in a handkerchief and hidden in the side pocket. The old version of me, the girl who believed goodness could keep her clean if she only stayed obedient enough, stood right there in that open car. I could still choose her. Then Alessandro's car entered the gates. It rolled to a stop. He got out before the engine died, saw the bag, the open door, the driver, and did not move for one long second. No command, no anger. No plea, his face gave me nothing. That was what made the decision mine. He had blood on his cuff, fresh. Not his, I thought, or maybe both. He looked tired in the particular way only controlled men look tired, as if exhaustion itself had permission to show on only 3% of the body. This was what his world cost. Stitches. Threats, men shot in hallways, every room listening for danger. The possibility that loving him would mean becoming fluent in loss. I understood it then with painful clarity. And I understood with worse clarity that leaving would not return me to innocence. That had already been taken. I closed the car door, from the outside. The sound was small, final. The driver blinked, finally looking at me through the rearview mirror. "Take it back," I said. When I turned, Alessandro was still standing where he had stopped. Something changed in his face then. Not relief. He did not allow himself anything so naked, but something in him released 1 degree. I walked past him into the house on shaking legs. Only when I reached the foyer did he speak. "Arya," I turned. His eyes were on the ringless hand at my side. "You chose with your eyes open." "Yes." A pause, then quieter. "That matters." I should have gone upstairs. Instead I asked, "Was that what you were waiting for?" He looked at me for so long I felt the answer before he gave it. "Yes." I nodded because I did not trust what else might happen if I didn't move. As I climbed the stairs, Nico murmured to Rosa, not quite softly enough, "If this is love, I would prefer a safer illness." Rosa clipped another dead leaf. No, you wouldn't. He considered that, sighed, and answered with grave misery. No, I really wouldn't. I went to my room smiling through tears I could no longer explain cleanly. I had been given a door. I had walked back in anyway. They took me on a rainy Thursday, which felt insulting somehow. If your life is going to split open, you want weather dramatic enough to respect it. I was in the downstairs pantry inventorying flour with Rosa because normal tasks had become my rebellion. Nico was nearby arguing with a delivery man about olive oil quality as if international peace depended on acidity levels. The lights went out, total black, then shouting, a crash from the front hall. Boots, Rosa swore in Sicilian. Someone grabbed my arm. I fought before I identified direction. Elbow, heel, teeth, panic sharp enough to make me strong and stupid at once. The man holding me cursed, shifted, nearly lost me. Another one came from behind and pressed something chemical over my mouth. I held my breath as long as I could, not long enough. When I woke, I knew two things before I opened my eyes. First, I was not dead. Second, I was near a kitchen. Vanilla, gas pilot, old fryer oil, cracked black pepper, copper polish. The language of a room built for feeding men, not comforting them. That small recognition steadied me. I opened my eyes to concrete walls, a chair, a single bulb, and Marco Ferretti leaning against a metal table as if he had ever belonged in a place like that. The betrayal should have hurt less after everything. It didn't. He smiled, that old polished smile, thinner now. Arya, I said nothing. That's fair. No, I said at last. Fair would be spitting. Something like regret flickered across his face. I would have respected him more if it hadn't. You don't understand the position your father put everyone in, I laughed. Do not make yourself sound tragic. You sold me. I placed myself where Franco needed me. That is not nobler. His jaw tightened. Good. Let him feel one thing honestly tonight. He crouched in front of me, expensive suit in a room that smelled like grease and rust. Your sister wasn't wrong, you know. I went cold. What? He did kiss her. The words landed like broken glass, not because I still cared what Marco had done, because I heard the shape inside it. Camilla had tried to expose the truth and used poison because poison was the only language she trusted anyone to hear. You used her too, I said. Marco looked away first. There it was. A door opened behind him. Franco Esposito entered like he was arriving late to a dinner party rather than a kidnapping. Older than Alessandro by nearly 20 years, silver at the temples, eyes warm enough to fool weaker people. That was his danger. He looked like civilization. Men like Alessandro at least had the decency to feel dangerous immediately. My dear, Franco said, this has all become so ugly. I stared at him. Then release me, he smiled. No, mirror. That was the word for him. I saw it instantly. The same stillness Alessandro had, the same economy, but emptied out. Whatever in Nico stopped him from becoming a monster, whatever hinge still resisted, Franco had snapped that part off years ago and called the result wisdom. You taught Marco to lie, I said. I taught him value. He nodded toward the chair. You're valuable to your father socially, to Alessandro strategically. Perhaps emotionally now, which is unfortunate for him. I looked at Marco then, because cowardice I understood better than philosophy. Did you ever mean to marry me? He hesitated. Which was answer enough. Franco left me an hour later with a guard outside and a plate of untouched food on the table. I didn't waste time crying. I examined the room. Single window too high to reach. Pipe along the wall. Loose hinge on the side cabinet. Beyond the door, I heard kitchen noise from somewhere adjacent. Skill is strange comfort, but comfort nonetheless. When the guard took me to the adjoining prep room later to wash my face, I memorized everything. Spice shelves, walk-in freezer handle, back corridor. Loading dock smell from the left, sea air faint beyond it. On the shelf sat a jar of orange peel. I moved it, only slightly. Upside down beside the flour tins in the exact arrangement I always used when I was nervous and trying to keep control of a kitchen, citrus by starch, sweetness beside necessity. A foolish clue. But Nico had mocked the habit enough times to know it. As they led me back, I said Alessandro's name once inside my own head and nowhere else. Not prayer, not hope, just orientation. The hours dragged, rain tapped somewhere above us. Men came and went, one laughed too loudly, another coughed like a smoker. I counted breaths, counted footsteps. Kept my back straight because sometimes dignity is the only weapon a room lets you keep. I had one move left, I made it. Then I waited. By the time they came for me again, I had loosened the hinge pin on the cabinet with the edge of a metal tray and hidden the sharpened sliver in my sleeve. I was not getting out cleanly. I was getting out difficultly. The guard opened the door, stepped in, and reached for my arm. I drove the metal into the meat of his hand and ran. Adrenaline makes maps out of memory. Left at the prep room, past the hanging aprons, through the corridor that smelled like diesel and wet stone, someone shouted behind me. Another pair of boots thundered from the other end. I grabbed the first thing my hand found from the kitchen rack, a small paring knife, absurd against guns but honest. Then the building exploded into violence. Not literally. Worse. Controlled violence. Strategic. Precise. Gunfire from the loading dock. Men shouting Alessandro's name like warning and prayer at once. A body hit the tile hard enough to skid. I backed against the freezer door, knife up, breath ragged. And then he was there. Alessandro Romano in a dark coat wet from rain, and someone else's blood on the sleeve. Moving through the prep room with the lethal calm I had seen in the restaurant, only now sharpened by something far more personal. His gaze found me first. Not the room, not the threats, me. The knife dropped from my fingers, it clattered against tile. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and pulled me against him so hard the back of my head hit his shoulder. One arm around me, one hand at the base of my skull. That hand was warm, warm. I don't know why that nearly made me cry before anything else did. I clutched the front of his coat. He said nothing. Neither did I. There are reunions too raw for language. Ours was one of them. Then he pulled back just enough to look at my face. Are you hurt? No. A lie, but not when he corrected. His thumb touched the bruise at my jaw once, very lightly, and the expression that crossed his face frightened me more than the gunfire. Nico barreled in behind him, panting. You moved the orange peel. I told him that was your chaos pattern. Rosa says I notice stupid things. Turns out I notice life-saving stupid things. Behind him, Tio, pale but stubbornly upright, one arm still strapped from the shoulder wound, muttered, If I die in a flour warehouse. I'm haunting everyone. I laughed once half broken. Not today, Nico said. Rosa made soup. You have obligations. Alessandro's hand stayed at my back as he guided me through the corridor, not pushing, anchoring. We passed Marco in the outer hall on our way out. He was on his knees, 2 of Alessandro's men beside him, face bruised, lip split. He looked up at me with something almost human in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Too late is an ugly expression. Marco wore it well. Aria! Alessandro did not let him finish. He shifted slightly, placing his body between us without blocking my view entirely. A choice, protection without theft. What happens to him? I asked. Alessandro's voice was flat. What he chose. Marco flinched harder at that than at the men holding him. I looked at him a long time, not because I loved him. That had rotted long before. Because once I had believed him harmless, and I wanted to understand how wrong a woman could be without dying of the knowledge. In the end, I understood only this. Some people do terrible things because they are desperate. Some do them because someone offered them a room at the table. Marco had chosen his chair. I turned away first. Outside, rain needled down across the dockyard. Alessandro put me in the car himself. When he climbed in beside me, the world narrowed immediately despite the men, the radios, the blood, the war still moving. He took my face in his hand once the door shut, carefully. As if I were breakable and he was angry at the universe for proving it. I told you, he said quietly. About what? That I would keep you alive. There it was, not a boast. not a vow made for effect, a statement he intended to bleed for if required. I looked at him and saw the exhaustion under the control under the rage. And beneath all of it, the man who had stopped himself over and over, because I mattered more to him whole than convenient. I leaned forward before I could think better of it and put my forehead against his mouth. Not a kiss, not quite, and almost finally breaking into something real. He closed his eyes. "Little Flame," he said into my skin, and this time the name sounded wrecked. Later that night, after we returned, after Rosa cried over me once and hid it by fussing with tea, after Nico loudly announced that surviving kidnappings should earn a person dessert privileges for life, Alessandro stood alone in the study for one brief moment that was his and not mine. Alessandro, he had almost lost her. Again, the realization was not dramatic, it was surgical. Franco had taken what mattered and laid it on the table like proof of weakness. There would be a cost now. Not because Alessandro was angry. Because mercy toward men like Franco was how boys died at 17 believing their brothers never came. When he came back to me, his face was unreadable again. But I knew enough by then to understand unreadable was not the same as empty. It only meant he had made up his mind. Franco's last compound sat outside the city near the water, half villa, half fortress, all ego. I knew the layout because fear had made me observant when they held me there. Service corridor on the west side, kitchen access near the loading bay, 2 stairwells, generator room below. Men posted where they expected attack, not where a frightened woman might have counted door hinges while pretending to shiver. When I told Alessandro what I remembered, he listened without interruption. When I finished, he said only, "You're staying here." I stared at him. "No," his jaw tightened. "Arya, I can tell you where the blind spots are. You already did. I can tell you which freezer door sticks and which hallway echoes and where Franco keeps too few men because he likes feeling." Untouchable, his eyes held mine. "That is exactly why you are staying." I stepped closer before fear could reason me out of it. "I am already in this. Stop trying to make me decorative." That landed. Hard, not because it was cruel. Because it was true enough to hurt. He looked away once, back. "You come with Nico," he said at last. "You stay behind him. If he says move, you move. If I say run, you run." Nico from the doorway. "I hate when love makes both people unreasonable." Rosa, passing behind him with bandages. "You've never been reasonable a day in your life." By midnight, we moved. The sea air bit cold through my coat. Engines went dark one by one as the convoy cut lights. Men checked weapons with quiet competence. Alessandro stood at the center of them like still water over depth, and when he glanced once toward where I sat in Nico's vehicle, that look steadied me more than prayer would have. The first breach came silent. The second didn't. Gunfire shattered the night. Alessandro's men surged through the west corridor exactly where I had said the cameras failed. Nico shoved me behind a stone pillar as 2 guards came from the stairwell. Tio, stubborn, impossible Tio, took one down with his injured arm strapped and cursed in 3 languages doing it. We reached the kitchen first, the same prep room, the same copper shelves. My stomach turned. "Generator downstairs," I whispered to Nico. "There's another exit behind it." He nodded, relayed it fast. The compound turned into moving thunder. Boots, shots, men shouting orders in clipped Italian, marble dust in the air. Somewhere above us, glass exploded inward. Then Franco appeared at the top of the east stairwell with 2 men, and the composure of a king who had confused survival with moral superiority. "Alessandro," he called. "You always were sentimental under the tailoring." Everything in Alessandro's face emptied out. That terrified me. Franco smiled toward me. "This is what she'll do to you. Make you choose softness in rooms built for steel." Alessandro fired before the sentence fully ended. 1 guard dropped, the other fired back. Chaos snapped wider. I saw it happen before anyone else did, a 3rd shooter emerging from the generator corridor, aiming not at Alessandro but at Nico, because Nico was shielding me. "Left!" I screamed. Nico turned. Not fast enough. Tio moved faster. He took the bullet meant for Nico high in the chest and hit the floor with a sound I still hear in my sleep. Everything after that happened in terrible clarity. Nico roaring Tio's name. Alessandro advancing on Franco. Me grabbing Tio's hand, blood-hot and impossible. Franco backing toward the balcony doors. Alessandro following with that deadly, silent certainty that said the old student had finally come to collect from the master. Franco said one last thing before Alessandro reached him. "You think love saves you from becoming me?" Alessandro answered in the only language either of them had ever fully trusted. The shot was single, final. Franco fell backward through the open balcony door and did not rise. For several seconds the compound kept fighting out of habit. Then the balance broke. Men surrendered. Others ran. Radios filled with the same word moving room to room. Finished. Not cleanly. Never cleanly. Tio died before dawn. Nico sat on the infirmary floor afterward with blood on his shirt and said to no one and everyone, "He still owed me 40 euros. Then he bent over and wept into his hands. I knelt beside him and did the only thing left. I stayed. Alessandro came in much later, after statements, after bodies, after all the hard administrative cruelties that follow violence. He stood in the doorway looking older by years and somehow more himself than he had ever allowed. He crouched in front of Nico, put a hand on the back of his neck, said nothing. It was enough. When he stood, his eyes found mine. "It is over," he said. The words should have sounded impossible. Instead, they sounded expensive. For the first time in my life, I believed a man exactly because I could see what the sentence had cost him to make true. Peace, when it came, did not look like peace. It looked like repaired gates. Fewer calls after midnight. Men walking through the house with their shoulders down 1 inch instead of 2. Rosa singing under her breath while chopping parsley because she no longer had to listen for gunfire between knife strikes. It looked like grief folded into routine and carried anyway. Tio's chair at the long kitchen table stayed empty for 3 weeks. No one touched it. Then one morning Nico sat in it, looked at the silence around him and said, he'd hate this mood. Someone passed the salt before he haunts us all for becoming tasteful. We laughed, then cried, then ate. That was how healing worked in that house, not upward, through. I began using the main kitchen as if it belonged partly to me. No one said it did. No one needed to. There were lemons always, flour where I liked it. My copper spatula, hanging beside Rose's heavy old ladle, as if it had been there for years. One rainy morning in late autumn, I was glazing small orange cakes when Alessandro came in without a jacket and stopped across the island from me. His presence no longer startled me. That was its own kind of danger. "What are these?" he asked. Something halfway between apology and celebration. "For what?" I dipped one cake, watched the glaze settle. "I haven't decided." He nodded as if indecision were respectable when attached to sugar. His hand moved into view then, setting a small velvet box on the counter between us. I looked at it. Then at him. Neither of us spoke for a second. Outside, rain tapped softly at the windows. Somewhere down the hall, Nico said, "If this fish has no salt again, I am leaving civilization," and Rosa replied, "Go barefoot." I almost smiled. When I looked back, Alessandro was still watching me. "Is this a question?" I asked, "or a statement?" "I think," he said, "you know which one I prefer." I laughed then, a real one. It startled both of us, though I think only one of us would have admitted it. I wiped my hands and touched the box without opening it. "This is not romantic," I said. "No, good." Something shifted in his expression, not confusion, recognition, because fairy tales had never been our language. We had bloodier materials than that, better ones too sometimes. Honesty, choice, the mercy of not pretending survival erased cost. I opened the box. The ring was simple, elegant, brutally sure of itself. Of course it was. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Alessandro, if you say no," he said, voice even, "the answer remains no, but the house remains yours to walk freely. The kitchen remains yours to ruin." And no man touches you by force while I'm breathing. Emotion made my hands clumsy. That is an appalling proposal speech. It isn't a speech. No, I whispered. It's worse. His gaze sharpened. Worse. Better. Silence, charged, soft, real. He came around the island then, slow enough to let me move if I wanted to. He stopped in front of me, very close. I noticed his hands first. Habit by then. The hands that had once felt marble cold around my wrist now hovered near my waist with visible restraint, as if even now he still believed touching me required permission renewed each time. I lifted the ring myself. That seemed to matter to him. Put it on, I said. He did. His fingers were warm. The warmth nearly undid me more than the ring. When he finished, he looked at my hand for a long second, as if the sight had entered him someplace private. Little Flame, he said. I had heard the nickname as warning, command, possession, fear. This was the first time I heard it as tenderness. It changed the room, not because the words were different, because he was. I went up on my toes and kissed him with all the quiet certainty I had built painfully, chapter by chapter. Bruised by the first time Alessandro's hand settled on the small of my back in a crowded room. It was warm. That should not have mattered as much as it did, but I had known his hands as marble first, cold around my wrist, cold at the edge of violence. Cold in the doorway of a ruined engagement where my life split open and never bothered fitting back together the old way. Warmth from him felt earned. Romano House had changed with winter. Not softened. Houses like that do not soften so much as loosen one button at the throat. The gates still watched. The men still carried steel beneath dark jackets. The hallways still knew what midnight sounded like when danger arrived. But there were flowers in the kitchen now because Rosa liked them, and no one was foolish enough to argue. Nico had developed a formal relationship with the pastry drawer, one built on betrayal and surveillance. And some mornings, when the light came through the east windows just right, the long dining room looked less like a place where men decided other men's fates, and more like somewhere a family might accidentally survive becoming one. That afternoon, I stood at the dining table arranging blood orange tartlets dusted with pistachio, while Nico hovered nearby in spiritual distress. I need it recorded, he said, hand to his chest. That Rosa told me these were for guests and not for opportunistic security chiefs, which is discrimination under several legal systems. Rosa did not look up from carving fennel. Under all legal systems, you are exhausting. I am beloved. You are noisy, he sighed. Sometimes I think you don't see me at all. Rosa slid one tartlet onto a plate and handed it to him without a word. He took it with the solemn gratitude of a man accepting communion. This, he told me, is how she apologizes cruelly without admitting fault. She didn't apologize, I said. She never does. That is part of her mystique. I was still smiling when Alessandro entered. He had changed out of his meeting clothes, though the tie remained loose at his throat, sleeves rolled once. The sight of him had stopped feeling like an interruption sometime in the last few months, and started feeling more like the room settling into its proper shape. His gaze found me first, then the pastries, then Nico stealing a second tartlet while pretending otherwise. You invited chaos into the kitchen again, he said. I'm marrying into it, I replied. Nico pointed at me with pastry in hand. You hear that? Yes. She understands the house now. Alessandro came to stand behind me as if he had always belonged there. His hand touched the small of my back once, lightly, in passing. Warm. Such a small thing, such a catastrophic thing. I finished placing the last tartlet and tried not to feel my pulse reorganize itself around one simple point of contact. It's almost time, I said. His hand remained, or it was for one more second than necessary. You can still change your mind. No! He studied my face in profile, not because he doubted me, but because he respected the weight of the choice anyway. Good, let him. Because some choices deserve witnesses. Camilla arrived at 3:15 wearing gray and no armor except lipstick. That was how I knew she was frightened. My sister only painted her mouth that carefully when she felt the rest of herself might come apart if she didn't pin one piece of herself into place first. The room shifted when she entered. Not violently, not even visibly to someone who didn't know how to read these people. But I knew it now, the tiny straightening of men who had once seen her at the center of a ballroom disaster, the brief stillness in Rosa's hands, the way Alessandro's thumb pressed once. Almost unconsciously, against my spine. Camilla's gaze moved from me to him and back again. "You really live here," she said. "Yes," she nodded, as if that answered several private questions at once. My father had not come. My mother had sent flowers and a note too cautious to mean anything yet. This was not forgiveness. It was not repair. It was only the smallest honest beginning. Lunch in a dangerous house with the sister who had once tried to save me in the ugliest way she knew. Rosa served. Nico complained theatrically about portion control. Alessandro watched everything without making the mistake of pretending this was easy. Halfway through the meal, Camilla's hand shook reaching for the wine. The serving spoon slipped from her fingers, hit the edge of a plate, and sent a knife skidding bright and sudden across the linen. One of Alessandro's men moved on reflex. So did Alessandro. So did I. I stepped forward before the room could decide to become something harder. My hand closed over the knife handle first. My other hand found Camilla's wrist. "It's fine," I said. No one spoke. Camilla looked at me as if I had hit her, not because of the knife, because I had stepped toward her again, in a dining room. In daylight, with nothing dramatic enough to justify it except instinct, the room eased by degrees. Alessandro's man stepped back. Rosa muttered something about everyone behaving like fools around cutlery and removed the knife entirely. Nico exhaled like a man who had just survived opera, but Alessandro did not look away from me. I felt his gaze before I met it. There it was again, not surprise exactly, but recognition so deep it bordered on grief. The same understanding as the night of the gun, only quieter now. Worse somehow because it lived in ordinary light. I know what he saw, not bravery. He would never insult me by simplifying it into that. He saw that I had not changed in the way pain often demands. That I was still made with the same fatal reflex toward the breaking point. Still someone who stepped closer when harm appeared, not because I enjoyed damage, not because I misunderstood risk, but because some part of me had always chosen people before pride. He had spent months trying not to love that, months failing. After dessert, Camilla found me alone for 1 minute on the back terrace while the others pretended not to grant us privacy. "I hated you for being easier to love," she said without preamble. The words should have landed cleanly. They didn't. Truth rarely has that courtesy. "I know," I said. She laughed once, broken around the edges. "No, you don't. I hated you because even when I wanted to cut, you kept trying to bandage first." The winter light silvered the garden walls. Somewhere behind us, Nico cried out, "If that bird comes near me again, I resign," followed immediately by Rosa's unimpressed. "It's a sparrow, not Satan." I smiled despite myself. Camilla saw it and shook her head faintly. "You're happy." I thought of warm fingers at my back, of a kitchen that had learned my habits, of grief carried together instead of hidden in separate rooms, of a man who had once felt like catastrophe and now felt, impossibly, like shelter. "Yes," I said. She swallowed. "Good." It was not absolution, but it was not nothing. When she left, Alessandro walked me back inside with his hand resting low against my spine. No urgency, no claim sharpened into warning, just contact, steady, familiar. In the kitchen, Nico was standing on a chair, while Rosa attempted to shoo a small brown bird toward the open window with a dish towel. "For the love of God," he said as it flapped near his head, "tell it I am mostly muscle and spiritually delicate." Rosa rolled her eyes. "Get down. I'll die. You won't. How do you know?" Without even turning toward him, she answered, "Because if you were going to die, you'd make more noise." Nico went still. The bird escaped through the window at last. Silence fell. Rosa set down the towel and looked up at him properly for the first time. Then, in the calm voice of a woman discussing weather, she said, "And because I have always known." Nico blinked. "Known what?" "That you were mine." The kitchen stopped breathing. Mine too, perhaps. Because Nico Belandi, feared by enemies, dramatic before soup. Helpless before a woman with a carving knife and standards. Sat down on the chair like his knees had failed him, and stared at Rosa as if the world had finally made one decent decision. I laughed, so did Rosa very softly, and when I turned, Alessandro was watching me with that same impossible expression, restrained, wrecked, certain. Later, long after the dishes were done and the house had quieted, I stood at the bedroom window overlooking the dark garden. He came up behind me without sound and slid one arm around my waist. Warm hand, warm chest, warm breath near my temple, no marble, no winter shade, only him. "I knew it the second time too," he said. I leaned back into him. "The second time what?" "When you stepped forward today." I smiled a little. "It was a knife on a tablecloth, not a gun. That isn't the point." I turned in his arms then. He let me. He always let me. His hand came up to my face, then hesitated in that old way he had never fully lost, as if even now tenderness still asked something careful of him. I covered his hand with mine. "You can stop looking surprised that I'm still myself," I said. Something moved in his eyes, deep, human, unarmored enough to hurt. "I'm not surprised," he said quietly. "I'm grateful." That nearly ruined me. His forehead touched mine. "When did you know?" I whispered. He looked at me for a long moment, as if the truth had weight and he meant to set it down correctly. "At the party," he said. "Then again every time after that, but today..." His thumb brushed my cheek. "Today there was no blood, no gun, no reason for heroics. Just a room, a mistake, and your first instinct was still to protect." My throat tightened. He gave a broken little laugh that barely qualified as one. "Do you understand how rare that is in my world? I understand how much it frightens you." "Yes. And now..." His mouth touched the corner of mine, not quite a kiss yet. "Now I know fear and love are not the same thing." That answer felt like something more sacred than poetry. I kissed him first, softly, then with certainty. When we parted, he rested his forehead against mine again and said the name he had made dangerous, then warning, then tenderness. "Little flame." But this time it did not sound like possession. It sounded like home. And because I had learned him too, the cold, the control, the wounds hidden under tailored silence. The warmth that had arrived late and meant more for it. I touched the line of his jaw and answered the way only truth ever should. "Yes," I said, "I'm here."